If the idea hadn't been as powerful as it was and overwhelming and that I had become obsessed with it immediately, we'd have quickly abandoned it. Nothing in our past would have really prepared us for a horseback ride of any length, especially not the longest one ever. That was part of the discovery, was how to do this. The longest straight line on Earth. My name is Louis Brunke, and back in 1988, I began a horseback ride from Tierra del Fuego in Argentina to the Arctic Ocean in Alaska. When the idea of the trip came up, it was kind of a collaborative joke.
Good boy, good boy.
It sounded preposterous to a lot of people, but we were all looking for something different to do in life. There were three of us, myself,
Take 20, quick 21.
Vladimir Orlova, who was already a friend of mine, and an Argentine I met in Buenos Aires named Roberto. I think we had all told about $12,000 in a camera.
I remember vividly when he came to me and he said, "Dad, we're going to ride horses from South America to Alaska." Some more conservative people wonder why would they do a thing like that. Because I said, because it's fun, you know, you do it because it's an adventure. Why not?
The Argentines call Ushuaia the southernmost city in the world. Lots of travelers who want to make long trips choose Ushuaia as their jumping off point. But there's essentially none who do it on horseback. None of us were really horsemen. So we had to train our horses and then ourselves. We knew when we started the trip that it was not going to be easy. We didn't know what the hardships were going to be. We didn't know what form they'd take. We knew that they'd come. And when they came, sometimes they just seemed a lot worse than what we could have imagined. When we began the trip, we were surrounded by well-wishers. The local folks, they might have jobs as taxi drivers. Their day job was something else, but down deep inside, they were gauchos.
I was filming with our Super VHS camera, and I was at the top of a little hill looking down into a sort of a square. And everyone was in costume, all the gauchos were in costume. It was a big event.
We came to the square and there was cameras and journalists and a bunch of people.
One of our horses, Nyandu, got overly excited and began kicking. And Vladimir made a false move. It put him right in the path of Nyandu's hoof.
I heard the crack and I told myself, well, this might be my bone.
And there was no mistaking what that meant. You heard it and you knew that he wasn't going to be leaving on any trip anytime soon.
I remember the doctor looked at my leg and said, "You're very lucky that you were 5 minutes away from hospital instead of 2 hours because you might lose your leg."
We had to make a choice. We needed to leave immediately or we were going to have to wait another year.
Reality was just in front of my eyes. My leg up and casted. So I said, well, it's obvious I can't move, but you have to move because the winter is coming. And I suggested them just leave me here and keep moving. When I'm up, I'm going to join them.
In Tierra del Fuego, it's some of the heaviest winds in the world, if not the heaviest winds in the world. And we had the major problem of dealing with too few people, too many horses. We were getting nowhere. It was just impossible. Traveling with Roberto was worse than being alone. I was frustrated by the lack of progress, and I was concerned about the oncoming winter, and I really wanted to get going, and it seemed to me that Roberto, his concerns lied elsewhere. That created a lot of friction. At certain times I camped out by myself, even in that period when we were, for all practical matters, still traveling together. I was very happy to know that Vladimir was coming back. We made it into Chile. We filmed the horses crossing from one side to the other. I think the Chilean border authorities were kind of at a loss when we first got there. They didn't know what to make of us. Our horses' papers were in order, but most of the animals that go back and forth between borders were in the back of a truck or in somebody's car. To actually ride across the border caused some head scratching. The tension was building as the time for Vladimir to return approached. We were dancing a kind of complicated dance. We both wanted the trip to continue, but little by little the facade of a friendship or the facade of doing this as a team began to dissolve. We continued north to Puerto Natales. I was at the spot that Vladimir was going to join back up, where we kind of had our showdown.
I flew from Buenos Aires and I found the farm. Of course, I was very happy to see Lois. And Roberto was already made his mind.
Porque no tenía comunicación con Luis y menos con Vladimir. Y es así que tomé la decisión de no continuar con ellos.
He had all the horses in his name simply because he was the Argentine, and only an Argentine could leave Argentina with horses. At the time, it seemed like a reasonable option, and it turned out to create a lot of complications. Roberto threatened to call the police if we tried to leave with the horses, and we did the same thing.
I remember Roberto loading the horses to the boat. He left only one horse, Phoenix.
For me, losing Sufridor was unacceptable because of the fact that we suspected that Sufridor had about the best shot of any of the horses of making the entire trip.
It wasn't a good feeling at all. We lost the horses, and especially Sufridor, but it was a new beginning. It was, for me, much better than to continue to struggle, just start it over.
At that time, we realized we were going to have to get new horses. The ranch that we were at, we actually bought one of their horses to continue on. That was Moro. Eventually, we ended up with two other horses, Fichu and Tobianich. And when we finally left Puerto Natales and got on the ferry that would take us to Puerto Aysén along the Chilean fjords, those three, along with Phoenix, were the four horses that we had. southern part of Chile was simply dotted with little towns that were accessible only by ferry or along trails on horseback. It was very, very sparsely populated. And we could travel for an entire day, maybe two, without actually seeing a car come down this, essentially a dirt path, big enough for a car to drive down. About 100 days into the trip, I realized, I think I was laying in my tent, I thought about the day before and the day before that and the day before that. I could remember them all, and I kept on going backwards, and I went backwards all the way to the very beginning, the first day of the trip, and I remembered something about every single day. I remember thinking that this is the ultimate. If you could actually say that you could remember the last 100 days at any point of your life, that was unique.
Usually we try to do 30, 40 kilometers a day. It's about 8, 9, 10 hours. I always like to read the maps. In every region we come in, we buy just normal tourist maps.
Where all these streets?
We follow the roads. Simple, it's always north. Just go with the sun.
A lot of times we were eating nothing because we just hadn't packed enough for it. Night would come, and we were so exhausted that we'd make ourselves some coffee and go to sleep, and the next morning have some coffee and keep going.
A normal day. Get up early, try to wake up Vladimir, do chores, ride a little while, try to wake up Vladimir again. Eventually make some coffee. That usually is enough stimulus to get Vladimir to wake up. Then he does most of the rest of the work. The hard part is waking up Vladimir. The rest is relatively easy.
We planned just about every day according to wherever we could find a place that we could get food for the horses, water for the horses.
The horses were their greatest concern, of course, all the time. The horses ate first, the horses drank first, the horses were beautifully taken care of by these two men.
I think that anybody who has a horse knows what that horse's personality is. But if you live with the horse day and night and you depend on the horse essentially to survive, you develop a unique type of relationship. You know pretty much everything about that horse, and the horse probably knows a lot about you. In certain cases, they probably know more about you than they'd like to. You see the differences in their personalities, and they become so unique that they become almost human.
That's the test run. He says it's too deep.
I know that it was odd. At one point I realized that I looked across the field and there was other horses and our horses. It looked like I was looking at different things. They weren't all horses. Those were our individuals out there, and then there was a bunch of horses. Because of the way they behaved and because they were often disobedient, probably with just cause, Vladimir and I began to refer to them early in the trip as the kids.
Morro!
I talk to the horses all the time. Somehow, maybe learning English, I use English talking to them. Not much Russian, so it was kind of combination. I talked Russian to Louis and English to the horses.
Phoenix was a very interesting character, and we talk about nobility in a horse. I think if you're going to call a horse noble, that Phoenix qualified. He seemed to be a loner, and he'd like to go off by himself, and he didn't really engage the other horses. I think maybe the reason that Vladimir was so attached to Phoenix is that they had possibly a lot in common.
Phoenix To me, he was a nice kid, first of all. But his eyes tell me a bunch of things, and just a feeling. It's just a feeling about being together as one body.
At one point, we discovered about Phoenix that he liked to wander off on his own and graze. We'd stop on the road. We didn't realize it at the time, but the ground there was marshy. The other horses were finding whatever they could to graze on off in the marsh. But they weren't going far from the road. Phoenix did. And at first it was almost comical. Gradually the situation got more and more frightening.
Phoenix!
Because we knew night was coming and Phoenix was exhausting himself in this mud and we couldn't get him out.
It was very difficult to see it and difficult not to be able to help. And this moment I think I wanted to be big muscle guy to lift him off of that. But it was impossible. I'm not big muscle guy.
As he tried to lunge himself out, he was working himself more and more deeply into the mud. And we were at a loss what was going on, why he couldn't get out. But it was clear that he was getting exhausted making any attempts and he was about to give up. A lot of horse people think that when you see a horse is starting to give up, it's a very bad sign.
There was no shooting. The camera was just sitting on a tripod for an hour or so, and we just trying to free him from the mud, free his legs from the roots.
We tried everything. We actually attached a rope to one of the other horses, to Moro, and tried pulling him out. And Moro was a big horse. Ah! At some point, eventually, after a few hours of this, Vladimir reached down and felt that there was a root and it had wrapped itself around Phoenix's hoof. And with night falling, Vladimir was able to free that, and we were able to pull Phoenix out of the mud. Up until that point, it was by far the most frightening moment. Every place that we went, we didn't come as strangers. We came as people on horses. Our horses were the ultimate icebreaker. People would see us. We looked very mangy, ill-kept, unshaven, hadn't been showered in a couple of days. But people would see that we weren't dangerous because all we were thinking about was trying to get food for our horses. And then they were willing to help us. And immediately there was a connection. And immediately we entered into their life. The one thing that still concerned us was Sufridor. We didn't want to let it go. Didn't want to let Sufridor go. As we traveled through Chile, we contacted the Argentine authorities and our supporters in Buenos Aires. And against all odds, we got Sufridor back. He had the most interesting personality and easiest personality to maybe for me to adopt. Ill-humored and whiny.
The emotional moment was when Sufridor came and joined the team. There was Mora and Fischer and Phoenix and Tovjanic. It was obvious that the team already set up for a friendship, who is who. And Sufridor came a smaller horse, and Mora and Fischer immediately make him feel that, oh, you're a new guy, so stay a little bit back.
It's gonna be a little bit difficult at first, huh? It's gonna be a little bit difficult. It's always hard to make friends. It's always hard to make friends.
Well, my favorite from the very beginning was Sufridor, the sufferer. His mother, his mare, died when he was born. So he was an orphan. And he was beat up by the other horses. So he had to struggle as a little bitty small animal. And became ornery, I guess, because of that.
The reunion between Phoenix and Sufridor was especially good to see because they remember each other. And I think there was brotherhood in between them.
We would talk to the locals, ask them about the conditions up ahead and what we could anticipate finding.
They said you can save a couple, 3 days maybe, going by a beach and cross this river.
And they said, well, what you can do is just go to the end of that beach, and there's be some cliffs across from you, and there's people that live in some houses on those cliffs. And if you wave to them, somebody will come across the boat, and for a small fee, they'll take you across in the boat. And so, well, okay, might as well give it a shot.
When we arrived, the river that's supposed to be crossed, it was much larger than I imagined. It was 500 meters, probably half kilometer.
It was emptying right into the ocean, and wondering if our horses could actually swim across this river.
Good boys. That's my good boys. Come on, Moro. Come on, Tovianic. Pichu, Pichu. Vini. Vini, fuerte, fuerte. Come on, boys. Come on, boys. Keep it up. Good boys. Those are my good boys. It's getting more and more difficult to hold on to this rope. And they're catching their footing. I'm amazed they made it across so fast. Maybe it's because I'm recording. It seems like they're getting across real quickly. I got one hand on the camera and one hand on the three of them. They're good boys. Those are my good boys. Those are my good boys. Yeah, five. Cuidado, cuidado. Whew. Now we have two horses on one side and two on the other. Here they begin.
Just to see the horses swimming ahead, to feel their spirit, seeing their eyes. It just gave me the same spirit that we have to go. It was very emotional.
Earlier in our trip back in Argentina, I met a young woman named Rosanna. We hit it off right away. I found her very lovely and charming.
No quiero.
No, no toques el lente.
Yo no lo toqué, hice así.
No, pero lo toques.
No lo toco.
Qué linda.
Every time that we knew that we'd be stopped for a couple of days, for a week or so, try to take advantage of that opportunity to have Rosanna come and visit. The accommodations weren't very luxurious, but we didn't mind. At one point, she was planning on coming to visit, and then she told me she wasn't going to be able to come and visit. I was frustrated by that and didn't understand really why. And she was trying to intimate that something major was going on. But eventually it kind of dawned on me that the event was that she was going to have a baby. So that added one more complication to an enormously complicated situation. Even though we were making a horseback ride in a foreign country and our lives were so different than the vast majority of people's lives at the time, I think that my reaction was probably typical of most people's reaction, or most guys' reaction in a situation like that. And I knew that I wanted to be there when the baby was born. Vladimir, unfortunately, was very supportive, and I dumped the horses with him, and I made this mad dash back to Tierra del Fuego, which involved essentially 3 days of nonstop travel in buses and airplanes and by car and so forth.
And he got back there just in time for the birth of my first grandchild, Andrea, this gorgeous infant.
We made arrangements so that I'd get the chance to see Andrea as often as possible. And we simply decided to be optimistic. Eventually the trip would be over and then we'd figure things out at that point. We knew we were going to cross back into Argentina. We crossed at the Paso de los Libertadores, or the Paso San Martin. It's the mountain pass in the Andes that connects Santiago and Mendoza in Argentina. That was a long ride. It took us, I think, 4 or 5 days just to reach the summit, just to reach the pass and the international border. When we got there, there is a tunnel that separates the two countries, but there's traffic going through the tunnel. We were fortunate in that border officials, what they agreed to do was allow us to go through the tunnel after hours, after it had already been closed to traffic. And both sides of the tunnel, they closed the door, on the Argentine side and on the Chilean side. And so when the day had ended, we had scheduled to ride up to the door, and there they opened the door for us, and we walked inside this tunnel, which was a few miles long, and the door clinged shut behind us. That was surreal, to be inside this international tunnel alone with our horses. What we didn't expect was that the lights all went off. And it was about as pitch black in there as you can possibly imagine.
We're inside the international tunnel in the dark. The tunnel is 3 miles long. Around us, see absolutely nothing. In other words, we're seeing about as much as you are of this tunnel right now.
Traveling on horseback is, I can't imagine that there's a better way to get to know a place. The proof in that was that in each of the countries that Vladimir and I went to, we very quickly became conversant not only in the language but in the culture.
It's the best way to see the world and the best speed to see the world. You have all your time to think about and observe the countryside. You can actually walk with the people and talk to them. To me, it's completely different view from the bus or train and car. You have a time to appreciate what you see.
We were looking for a place to keep the horses, and we found a place outside of the city of San Luis. And we left the horses there to graze, and there was a ranch hand there who was keeping an eye on them. But after a couple of days, we got word that Moro had been badly injured. Somehow he'd gotten his hoof caught in a wire. And when we got there, it was hard to make anything of the injury, but there was a deep gash right where his hoof met the lower part of his leg.
Dice que eso está bien. Sí, es de agua. No es agua.
No pienso que iba a perder esa parte.
In any group of horses, one of them was going to always prove to be the leader. In this case, it was Moro. The other horses were willing to follow him, and he was big, handsome, full of energy. He was just marked for success. He was going to make this trip, and he wasn't even going to slow down doing it. We took him to a veterinarian, and we were prescribed an antibiotic, and we carried that with us, and we gave it to Moro 1 or 2 days, and he actually seemed to be improving. And when he seemed well enough to actually walk on it, we started traveling with him. It just seemed so unfair. The horse was so vigorous and full of life, and he was really the leader and kind of our mascot. And his injury seemed to be improving.
My hands put this needle on his vein. You think that it will help, and instead it's just kill. So you feel like you're injecting poison to your kid.
I know, I think we were both devastated by losing him. Before we left Argentina, we knew we were going to need at least one more horse to be able to continue on. We were able to find a family who was willing to part with one. I'm not sure what his name was when we got him, but Vladimir changed it to Voronoi, which means black horse in Russian. We eventually added a pack horse. His name was India. We got to the Bolivian border. Leaving Argentina became incredibly difficult. The Argentines wouldn't let us leave with our horses. Vova was getting extremely frustrated. That stalling of our trip and a lot of other things, just a culmination of difficulties, was taking its toll on Vova, and I didn't realize to what extent. When we finally got authorization to leave Argentina with the horses, it was a huge relief to me, but it didn't do too much for Vladimir. And he told me that he didn't want to continue. There are so many different little frustrations, and Vladimir was willing to put up with the physical ones, but things like not being able to leave Argentina with the horses, and the prospect that we might confront the same types of idiocy in other places, I think that probably played part of it.
Our financial situation was so bad that coming to the border, I felt that every night we have to choose that our horse is going to eat something or us, not both. At this point I was very tired of this situation.
Essentially pleaded with him that things would get better. And for some reason, he decided to continue. We'd been traveling along the river valley for, I think, a couple of weeks, and we're climbing out of that, and people that we met on the roadside usually got off the road before we crossed their path. They were clearly uncomfortable with us there. They were just didn't like strangers. But we found somebody, and they told us that they didn't have any corn in their village, but to keep going, there was a little village called Piticuno. And so we continued riding. We went down a windy road that kind of led into the town, and there was houses, little stone houses, that all looked abandoned. We ran into a little courtyard, and there was two old women sitting on the ground, and they were very excited, and they were speaking Quechua. That's the language of the Incas, and the language of the locals there.
Well, I left Luis with the horses on the road and walked down the creek. I saw a little hut there, and one woman come and look at me, and I asked for the corn to buy. And apparently she didn't understand that. But she screamed something to the hat in the Quechua. I didn't understand what she said. I hoped it was something about corn.
It seemed to me that a lot of time had actually gone by since he had left. And it sounded like I was hearing kind of howling and yelling off in the distance. I rode towards that, and as I got closer, I heard more and more yelling, and I yelled out for Vova, and he didn't answer.
I saw the several men and women going down, kind of in a hurry. And I didn't understand why. What is so hurry? I just need to buy some corn. But when they approached me, it was just beating starting, without saying anything. Just beating and beating and beating and beating.
They had a fire going, and I saw shadows dancing around and heard a lot of screaming and excited yelling, and a voice that sounded like it could be Vova's, but he didn't sound normal at all.
The man took my hands back, and the women were more furious, actually. They were looking for the big stones to my head.
I tried to get Phoenix to get closer, but it was just pitch black in front of his feet, and he wouldn't get any closer. And all the time I'm yelling out Vladimir's name.
My memory went like fast forward all my life, behind, my daughter, our trip, parents, sisters, everybody, friends.
Just about then, I heard an explosion. Assumed it was a gun, and that it was either meant for Vladimir or for me, but at any rate, there was no good reason for me to stick around any longer. If we had both gotten in whatever situation Vladimir had found himself in, it would be a long time before anybody knew anything about us.
After all these stones and everything, I was still very conscious, and I saw the man in front of me with a big knife, sharpening it.
I started riding back to the only place I knew to go was that little schoolhouse that we passed early that day. While I was riding, I had my recorder. I recorded my notes every day. And I started talking in the recorder, simply describing what had happened up until that point.
I'm terribly worried about Vladimir. I hope this was just some type of misunderstanding and that he was too far off to hear me, but I don't think that is possible.
When we found him, he was unrecognizable. They had beat him with sticks and stones. There's blood everywhere. Even the children in the village had tried to hang him. And the town had essentially just gone berserk. And somehow he was able to keep them from strangling him. In that area, in these small villages, the inhabitants have some beliefs that for us are rather strange. One of them is that there are men that come to take human fat for religious rites. They figured that that's what Vladimir and I were there for. They're called in Quechua cariciri, and in Spanish sacamanteca.
Gente alto y así pues, todo así con sombreros largos, un caballo blanco, ¿no? Entonces ellos han pensado diciendo que es sacamanteco porque nadie todavía de ustedes todavía no han cruzado por este camino, entonces ellos han pensado seguramente es eso y entonces nos va a matar.
Court was assembled and the culprits were lined up. Testimony was taken very formally. Vladimir was asked to give his version of the events. The justice of the peace asked him, what would you like done? And Vova told him at that time he just wanted his things back and to be left free to go on his way. My expectation was that he was going to stop. If he needed a last straw, they'd folks in Pitikunu handed him a whole bale of hay. But we never discussed it, and the subject never came up. We just kept going.
It was surreal for me. After this, I didn't have any concern about continuing the trip. It was just obvious that since I've survived this accident, I better make it up all the way.
Right. Now this is La Paz. Today is Monday, the 27th of November. The sky today, a little bit gray. We're waiting for rain. Hopefully, we'll miss out on most of the rain as we ride.
I'm William Erickson. I'm a kid from Rochester, New York. Graduated with a degree in photography.
Take 87, horse walking, William Erickson.
Still hanging on, still hanging on.
William worked for Alpha Color in Gardena. That's where I met William. I started to tell William about the ride.
He told me early on about his crazy son and his crazy son's Russian friend and this horse journey they had just started. I would get this film every month or so and get it processed, and I'd look through the images, and I was kind of vicariously living through these guys.
My dad said, you know, why don't you take a couple weeks off and go join them? They love to have company. You take pictures of them, it'd be a great help.
I said, okay. I'd been on a horse once or twice when I was a little kid, but I had no frame of reference for horses at all.
Hey, he looks like a professional up there.
The first time he came, he was just kind of bewildered. It was completely. I'm sure he felt like he'd just been dropped on the moon someplace with two bizarre characters.
For them, I understand I was a bit of a surprise. They expected me to be someone quite a bit older, and I think Vladimir said, I thought you'd be some old, boring guy.
Any final words? Not final words, any closing, let's say closing words.
Video will.
Let's say
I leave
closing
my
words.
stereo to my sister, to my brother, my camera, and Deb, you can have my bug if you can make it run again. It's all yours.
William was our best photographer. He was with us for lots of important moments. I think we knew that if we were going to get a good shot of the two of us together, William was going to be behind the camera.
Both of you to your right, a little bit more.
Sometimes he forget that the microphone is right there. And a lot of times I said, William, will you shut up, please?
Good boat, good horses, good riders, fucking beautiful.
He held his own, and he had a great sense of humor. He had us both in stitches the entire time he was with us.
Yeah, Louis, you got away with llamas, bud. Still want me to film you with the tame llama?
The great llama hunter returns from the kill.
I bagged me another big llama. Another set of seat covers for my car.
In moments where we were kind of losing our enthusiasm about the trip, his enthusiasm was infectious and helped us to keep going. William or my dad weren't always with us.
Horses, take 28.
We had to do whatever we could to get the shot. Wherever we were, if we had somebody who we could quickly train to hold the camera, use the camera the way that we wanted for that particular shot, that's what we'd do. It wasn't always easy. There's an awful lot of setting up the camera, running back to the horses, walking towards the camera, changing the camera angle, getting another shot. Each shot was going to be pretty hit or miss, so that if we repeated each shot or got the same shot from different angles 4 or 5 times and crossed our fingers, and then maybe out of all of that we'd get a couple of seconds that would make it, that would do it. When the idea of the trip came up, I had to come up with some way to find somebody who knew something about filming. And it occurred to me that Vova had experience in television in the Soviet Union, in St. Petersburg.
I look for the different point of view of documentary that I want to see. Not only our hardship and adventures, but also the people and cultures and the history of the places we went through.
We had been invited on a television program that was for children. We went on it with our horses, and the following day we went through some little town, and the kids came out as they always would. They surrounded us, and they were just overjoyed because these were the horses that were on TV yesterday. One of the kids said that during their class that the teacher had a lesson plan, but it was preempted because all of the kids wanted to know where Alaska was. And the rest of the, the class time was spent discussing Alaska. At that time I thought, to be able to inspire that interest in kids the way other adventurers had inspired me, that meant an awful lot. That was worth sacrificing an awful lot.
Come on, Phoenix.
It was a day we were making a shortcut across some part of Ecuador. It seemed like a really good idea. We actually discovered a trail. It was a cobblestone trail. I realized immediately, and it was part of the Inca Trail. And I was just overjoyed to find that. I think Vladimir started rolling his eyes immediately at all my enthusiasm about finding this rock trail on the ground. There were some rough patches, but we continued down that trail. At one point, the brush became extremely thick, and Phoenix disappeared, just disappeared. We discovered that you couldn't see it because of how thick the foliage was, but there was a drop-off. Eventually found him, and he was okay. But by then, we were surrounded with this thick foliage, and pretty much at a loss of what direction to go in.
I left Louis with the horses when the road ends, and I said, well, wait here, I'm going to look for somebody.
So I sat and I waited with the horses, and time went by, and a lot of time went by. And eventually, Vladimir appears, and I was relieved to see him come back. And behind him, there's about a 5-year-old boy. I said, what's going on? And he said, well, I couldn't find anybody, but I found this hut, and this kid was in the hut.
And I asked him he knows how to get to the bridge to the next town. And he said yes. And I said, can you show us how to get there? And he said, no, you have to wait for Mama and Papa to come. And I said, how about if we do it fast, before they're coming back? He said, no. So I have $1 or something in my pocket. I said, how about if you give it to your mom and dad in case they come in before you come in, so you can explain that you were kind of wicked. And he agreed.
We were very, very grateful for this 5-year-old saving the 2 brave adventurers. We'd been writing for quite some time.
That's a big deal, isn't it, Phoenix?
We discovered that Phoenix really did not look well. He'd lost a lot of weight. He'd lost a lot of hair from his flanks. And we were very concerned about him.
Smile. Smile, Phoenix, smile.
We didn't saddle him. We simply led him behind the other horses. He seemed to improve throughout the rest of Ecuador till we got to Quito. The weather had improved a lot, and we found a very nice ranch for the horses to stay at. And then we went into the city. About 2 days after we arrived, we got a call from the owner of the ranch that one of our horses had died. And for both of us, it was bad, but for Vova, he took it very, very hard. There would be no replacing Phoenix.
I was so thankful to Louis. He took care of all the procedures to do, because I was so speechless and crying and everything. I couldn't do anything. It's just, I was feeling like paralyzed, as physical as mental. Something very important just break my heart.
Phoenix's liver was very enlarged, and whether that was some hidden chronic condition or more likely some toxic type of vegetation that he overindulged in, there was no way to know.
First I mourned Phoenix. 6 months later, I knew that my brother was dead in car accident in St. Petersburg at almost the same time as Phoenix, just a few days difference. I was thankful to Mom not to give me the news immediately, because the 2 things were very difficult to hold.
We had to go on at that point But it would seem to have no meaning, him dying, if we had stopped. He helped us get that far. And we'd have to make the rest of the trip without him. When we arrived in Colombia, we knew that Colombia had a reputation for having an awful lot of violence. At certain points, the government had had difficulty maintaining control over the entire country. In the southern part of Colombia, we arrived at a little town where there was a garrison, a military garrison, and there were actually 2 tanks, one sitting on either side of a bridge.
I could feel the tensions on the people. They were acting differently. They were very careful about what they're doing, what they're saying. It was an ear.
We were introduced to the young lieutenant who was in charge, and he was very polite, very friendly, very much in charge. When he wasn't talking to us, he was usually barking orders. And we asked him why these tanks were there. He said, we just have them here because there's a lot of banditry in the area. He assured us that all of Colombia was well secured by the military and there were no problems. Then we laid out our map and we described the trip that we were planning on making through Colombia.
¿Cuáles son para nosotros los lugares, las regiones rojas?
Rojas, áreas rojas.
Área roja.
Pues podemos decir que áreas rojas habían antes aquí en lo que es Urabá. Ya no hay.
El área roja más dura era esta. Ya
esta
no,
más, la más peligrosa era por esta parte. Ya está calmado todo. Y la otra era por acá al César, pero ustedes por allá no van. Ustedes van es por aquí, se desvían aquí, por estos lados. Y la otra es por allá arriba. Lo que es el Magdalena, toda esa región.
He was saying that it was okay to go where we're going, but be careful on the north of Colombia. The area was still on alert for the guerrilla movements.
We didn't tell him at the time, but our trail required that we go through in the red zone. That was a little disconcerting because there he is with 2 tanks purportedly protecting the town from bandits and saying that everything is fine and under control. But there was one exception to that rule, and we knew that we were going to have to go through there. Colombia is such a beautiful place. The weather's just perfect. The people are so nice. It's just the most absolutely charming place. We were invited to a rodeo in Cali, and we were surrounded by some of the most absolutely stunning women we had ever seen in our lives.
The girls in Cali, they're particularly beautiful.
2 guys coming on a horseback, 2 handsome young men going to Alaska on horses. And you got groupies all over the place.
All the time our hosts were pointing out the beautiful horses being displayed in the rodeo, and us trying to nod politely and acknowledge the horses. But Colombia is a special place. There were lots of times on the trip that we'd have someone express an interest in what we were doing. And sometimes we jokingly say, well, yeah, join us if you want to. And we were delighted in Colombia. Some avid horsemen that we'd met, they just up and decided to take 5 days off from their regular lives to ride with us.
They showed us the road, and it was a wonderful week, traveled together. It was incredibly beautiful countryside.
It had been raining quite a bit, and the rivers were really full, running very high. And we came to a place where there was a railroad bridge, which we could easily cross, but the horses, there was no way they were going to be able to cross because you had to walk across railroad ties with large gaps between each tie.
Obviously, we didn't want to risk our equipment, so we decided to unload everything and carry it through the railroad bridge.
It was rushing and it was rapids and it looked pretty menacing. The idea we had is that we could at least string a rope across the river to be able to keep control of the horses and they wouldn't be swept away. I got the rope attached to my waist, and I think that Vladimir claimed that he had to be behind the camera at the time.
And the footage I call this Bad Day of Lewis.
I took a couple of steps into that river and realized I was going nowhere whatsoever. I thought it was going to be impossible to get the horses across the river. At just about that time, on the other bank of the river, a rider showed up.
We saw one guy across the river with the mule. He just walked across like it was nothing special about it. So after that, we laughed. Then just pushed the horses ahead, and they crossed without any problem.
You know what, Lewis? Definitely a good idea that we're making a real small impression and kind of quietly moving through this town, being as safe as it is here.
For me, the ride was a way to have an adventurous life, but still keep my real life back in the States. It just happened that one of those times was right around the Darien.
In the Darien jungle, it's the jungle in the isthmus between Colombia and Panama. It's very mountainous, and those mountains are blanketed in thick foliage. The conquistadores themselves considered the Darien too dangerous to travel through, and they wouldn't travel into the Darien at all. There was no ship that we could take. We'd already checked with everyone we could think of. So we were essentially forced to confront a physical challenge that we would have just as soon avoided.
And we first took a ferry boat up the river.
When we arrived on the opposite shore of the river, instead of loading everything back on the horses, we thought we'd give them one more day of rest and use the stream and some dugout canoes to be able to move all our belongings.
It was like National Geographic. It was like Tarzan movies. That was really the jungle.
Oh, nature's touching me. Oh, gross.
Let's get a close-up of the nature touching Lewis. That's kind of what I was hoping for.
That was far away from everywhere. It was very deep jungle that I've never seen. And it was really rough terrain, always up and down, and completely covered with the trees. My feeling was just to cross it as soon as possible and get some water and cold beer somewhere.
Knowing that the vegetation in the jungle wasn't appropriate for horses to be eating, we had decided that instead of riding our horses, which would be hard in the jungle anyhow, we would pack them with feed. About the first thing that happened was that Sufridor had one of the bags of feed tied to his saddle, and somehow it came loose, fell. So that meant that we had to find feed for the horses every single day, and that was a big unknown whether or not we'd be able to do that.
The Darien jungle was every day was incredibly strenuous. You really couldn't relax. There really wasn't a path. We pretty much hacked our way through the Darien. You're not just hacking a space for yourself, you got to make a space wide enough for a horse.
It was hot all the time, and it was a good thing that it was hot because it wasn't raining. Because if it had rained, we would have stayed right where we were, and we would never have gone any further in any direction. We would have been stuck right there.
So sometimes we travel with the guides some days, and they told us that if you cut this bamboo, there is water.
Which ones can you use? Ask them which ones you can use. They could be live ones, or?
The inside of the bamboo is hollow, and if you slice through it, you can find the most pure, cool water. And somehow it just feels refrigerated when you're drinking it.
I'm proud to have everyone see me eating with my fingers. Oh, it's okay. I washed my fingers yesterday.
The Darien jungle, I think, is purported to be the most venomous place around. There's all sorts of things that want to bite you.
Chiggers are these little insects that burrow into your skin. Oh, it's horribly itchy. And they burrow in and you can't get them out, so all you want to do is scratch, and then you wind up just really scratching yourself up. So we would get rubbing alcohol in an effort to try and smoke them out, so to speak. Just pour the alcohol on and try and get them to come out. Bug repellent didn't work. There was really nothing we could do.
Most places, it was pretty obvious when we'd cross from one country to the next. And the border crossing between Colombia and Panama, in the middle of the jungle, there is a small obelisk indicating that you've crossed from Colombia into Panama.
We would come across these small little enclaves, if you will.
Their family is Paijita.
Which means what?
Paijita exists because there's this family this year.
Ah, I see.
And you should see some of these people when you burst out of the jungle with horses. First of all, they've never seen horses, and they're not even used to seeing white guys. You could see that there was some modern touches here and there. Some of the younger kids had T-shirts on, but the older folks predominantly still were in very traditional dress. They were almost always hospitable. You didn't know when it was going to end. You knew you were headed in the right direction.
Much to the despair of all the traffic behind us, we had a police escort across the canal.
I think it is about a couple of miles long. There is no sidewalk there. It's just 2 lanes with the heavy traffic.
A lot of the people waved to us as they finally were able to pass us in their cars. A couple of people didn't quite have all the fingers participating in their wave. We made it across, and our horses, I'm guessing, were the first and probably the only horses that ever crossed the Bridge of the Americas on their own.
It was a symbolic bridge for the trip. This water under this bridge was really symbolic border between South and North America.
For me, the hardest point came when we'd finished going through the Darien. We had all the hardest parts behind us. Central America was a far easier time as far as traveling was concerned. The villages are close together. There's always some place to stop and get water, get something to eat. And it was cheap, and so we didn't have to concern ourselves with feeding ourselves or feeding the horses. We knew we'd have a road under us all the way right up to the Arctic Ocean. But we still had to get up in the morning and ride our horses all those miles, regardless of the weather, regardless of the conditions around us, or whatever it was. At that point, I said, we've had our adventure. Nothing's going to be as challenging as what we've already gone through. And without that challenge, without the unknown, my whole perspective on the trip changed.
I'm sure you understand that physically it was difficult, but emotionally it was far more difficult emotionally. Far more difficult. So, because after all, day after day after day, some days with great adventure, most days with just plodding along.
There was a lot of bureaucracy we still had to go through. Central American countries are close together, but that just made it a little more frustrating because it seemed that all we were doing was dealing with bureaucracy to make it from one country to another. We were riding so much that if you had one thing on your mind, it was kind of hard to really find some way to get it off. And there's always the reality that Rosanna and I were separated in distance and in time, and that we might end up going our separate ways. And I felt that was probably happening, and I didn't like that at all. So at that point was a really tough time for me. During the entire trip, we were always second-guessing ourselves, especially anything that had to do with the health of the horses. And Indio seemed to be drinking more than normal. He was looking for water all the time. And Fichu had been sick too a lot, sweating, breathing heavily, and didn't know what to attribute it to. We'd had the horses get colicky before. Sufridor had gotten colicky, and we'd had him tethered him right next to our sleeping bags and spent the whole night worrying about him. And the next morning he was fine. And colics are simply tummy aches for horses. And for a variety of reasons, they can be fatal. That day, Indio seemed to be getting worse. I wanted a veterinarian to see him, but we didn't have any place to stop or find a veterinarian. We figured we'd get to where we were going to spend the night and try to find a veterinarian from there. When we got there, he was doing worse. It was already early evening, and we didn't want him to lay down. We believed that that was dangerous for him.
No.
So we did what we needed to do to keep him from laying down. We just walked with him slowly. I walked some distance to another town that I could find a telephone. I was able to contact some friends, but it was already too late in the day. They couldn't find a veterinarian. Things just deteriorated very quickly from there.
I don't remember filming it. I don't remember even how I get the camera on. Remember that Louis tried to free some excrement, just to do everything he could just to stop this collapse.
I just wanted him to get back up.
It was very difficult to accept that Indio, who came from northern Argentina all the way through to Panama, and died because of stupid colic.
Our horses had just made unbelievable efforts to get us as far as they had, and I wanted to feel worthy of them, and at that moment I really didn't.
When Louis realized that India was dead, he just turned and hit whatever he found, and that was the window, and he badly cut his hands.
Louis could no longer take it emotionally. He couldn't go on. He said, later on he told me, I couldn't put one foot forward any longer. The emotional strain of thinking so far in advance, all the distance we've come, it just got to me.
There were times when it was crucial for the trip for both of us to be up and going. And the one who was enthusiastic and up just knew that they needed to help out the other.
And Vladimir told me he's got to take a rest.
So we took very good rest there. I think maybe it's helped him not to be so hard on himself. Every time our kids died, it's very hard on us. And of course we had to move on, and for a couple of weeks we were just sad and silently moving on.
Mexico, we spent a lot of time in the highlands. It was cool in the highlands, but it was slow going. As soon as we could, we made a beeline for Veracruz. Because once we got to Veracruz, we were going to be on flat land along the Gulf of Mexico, right to the U.S.-Mexican border, and then beyond. We'd gotten a horse in Panama by the name of Sagittarius. We didn't particularly think that the name fit in with our rustic group. He was, a beautiful horse to us, but to the uninitiated, the horse is pretty ugly. He has big barrel belly, kind of mangy looking, and it reminded us of the former president of Panama. So we called him, we gave him the name Nori. We were already gone through that whole process of getting our horses to calm down, and Nori was anything but calm. He was nervous about everything. He'd be leaping over the highway and leaping into traffic left and right, and Vladimir he just couldn't stand Nori. And I didn't mind Nori because he'd move fast. If we could just avoid the traffic, and if Nori didn't get us all killed by leaping out and into the traffic, we'd make it to the U.S. My main concern going back into the U.S. was that we had been treated so well by people in South America. And in a way, I was feeling concerned that I wasn't going to be able to show Vladimir anything like that within the United States, because we depended so much on how people were going to treat us. But I was very happy and very proud that I was wrong, that we were treated just every bit as well when we got into Texas and beyond. We were treated everywhere the same, with the same type of warmth and the same type of attention. Our horses were treated well everywhere we went. And that was real reassuring. There was some common bond, whatever we were doing, for whatever reason, no matter where people were, no matter what their experience with the horses was. They seemed to appreciate what we were doing, and they wanted to help.
We're going up the road. We really don't have a place to stay yet.
Well, if you want to, I got some hay and oats down here. Just take them old horses and throw them up down here in the corral for tonight.
Appreciate that.
Hey, you're sure welcome.
That was reassuring, and that felt very good.
I remember when we crossed Missouri River by ferry.
Heading for Alaska, huh? Where'd you start from?
Tierra del Fuego.
Where?
Tierra del Fuego, in Argentina.
Argentina?
Where South America comes to a tip.
Holy Christ, that's a long ways away.
When we get across, we spoke with the people there and stayed there, and we agreed that sense of humor of the people, it was very good.
This is a strange way to get to Alaska, though, guys.
There was a moment in Kansas that I'm particularly fond of. We were riding down the road, and around us there was nothing but cornfields as far as the eye could see. Pickup truck pulled over, and the guy's yelling over at us, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And so we yelled back, gave him a brief synopsis of what we were doing, and he said, have you ever seen anything as beautiful as all this? Vova and I kind of looked at each other and we shaked our heads. Yeah, I loved that idea. That guy, he lived in a world where he was surrounded by cornfields. That was, for him, the best of all possible worlds.
Before we wanted to go straight and through all Kansas, but we get to the point that it was so boring, so straight, so flat, and we wanted just at least to see the mountains. So that's why we turned to the Colorado and Wyoming, Montana.
There were long periods where we really didn't have much to say to one another.
I can live without speaking much several days. When I don't feel like saying anything, I just don't say anything. It's just my character.
Vladimir a lot of times has trouble expressing his feelings to someone. Being confrontational doesn't come easy to him. And I'm more inclined to tell you exactly what I think and get it off my chest and then move on. Sometimes I could tell that he was pissed off at me. I could tell that he probably would have liked to kill me. And he wasn't doing it, and I'd almost have preferred that he take a swing at me than not say anything, so that would just build up my frustration and my anger.
It's not arguing much, but it's silent arguing somehow. It's not good for me, not good for anybody. But it's my personality, my character like it is.
We camped out on the Canadian side of the Alaska-Canadian border. And in the morning, the sun came up, and take a look at our map, and we could tell that there was a ridge of mountains that we were looking at, and that was Alaska. I think that there's probably other people that have seen Alaska for the first time and felt overwhelmed, but I suspect there's very few that quite felt it the way that Vova and I felt at that moment. We had made arrangements to travel along the Alaska pipeline. There's a service road that runs right along next to it where there's no traffic. There was other travelers. William came to join us. There was a young couple who had quit their jobs and decided to travel the country. We'd hit it off with them, and they joined us.
They had 10 people, 20 people traveling with them at one time or another, just because just hanging on and having fun. Big meals every single night, great cooks.
We'd get steak and seafood and wine and beer, and it was a rolling party.
At the Arctic Circle, a little brie and a little Cabernet always goes very well, doesn't it?
We were always on the lookout for bears, of course. It turned out that almost everyone, except Vladimir and I, were seeing bears. We were almost disappointed.
You had the Northern Lights, and it was Alaska. Alaska was beautiful. It was just a great way to end the ride. It almost got to the point where I didn't want it to end. We were having such a good time, and it was such a sense of accomplishment. At this point, Sufridor, he was kind of winding down his end of the trip. We weren't even making him carry anything anymore.
The most beautiful part that we don't even have to hold him because he will follow the friends. So he was completely in relaxing finishing of the trip, just walking by or behind like he wanted.
We were looking and trying to figure out exactly how we were going to get to the Arctic Ocean. The best access, virtually the only access that we had, was to go through the oil fields. And there's a consortium of the oil companies there called Alyeska. And we had to ask them permission to go through their oil field so that we could get to the water. We had traveled 5.5 years, and there was 13 miles between us and the Arctic Ocean. And the big bad oil companies said no. It's kind of hard to turn two guys and their horses down after we'd gone so far and turn us back at the gates of their oil refinery.
I gotta imagine that at some point they realized we can't stop these guys. They let us go.
Off in the distance, believe it or not, is the oil fields of Prudhoe Bay.
The night before we finished, we had one last major celebration.
Voila! Final campfire.
This?
Move over, I would take a picture of your final campfire.
And I took Vova aside at one point, trying to, I suppose to kind of arrive at some closure as we were finishing the trip. I said, you know, we've had a lot of problems, especially lately, but it is amazing that two people could do this, you know, be together for 5.5 years, and it's kind of natural that we would have problems. And Vova looked at me and said, you know, I don't think that way. I think what he meant was that he couldn't just simply dismiss the problems that we'd had as natural, and that shouldn't have happened between us. I recognize that my gesture was probably wishful thinking. I was hoping that would be enough, or that he'd come back and say, yeah, you're right, but that's not Vova. In the morning we woke up and everything was white. It turned that just horrible looking oil refinery into something that would at least be appropriate for our last few images of our trip.
So now we all left and went to the water to leave them alone. That was the whole idea, let them alone now. Now they ride the final half hour alone. There was a rise coming towards the water. You couldn't see them because they were on the other side of the rise, and then when they came across the top of the rise, along the top, there they were, the two guys coming very slowly riding along after 5.5 years. And I was shooting and I was talking, and that's when I lost it. I couldn't, you know, choking up crying. You know. The final half mile is now happening. Bubba and Lewis are a half mile from the Arctic Ocean on the 2nd of September, 1993. Sufridor, Fichu, and Nori.
They were able to patch us through using a radio and telephone, and we were able to actually talk to our point man in Buenos Aires, who had worked so hard. My mom, and a few other special people.
A few more yards to go to the water. So you can think about us as we're walking up to the water.
It was just pure elation. I couldn't describe any other way.
Sufridor is about to step into the Arctic Ocean. He walked in the Beagle Channel. 5.5 years.
There are very few moments in life for anyone that could surpass that moment for Vova and I.
Los, Vova, do the hug again. That's it. You need another one.
Thanks to so many people whose names we could never even remember that helped us and encouraged us and thought it was a worthwhile thing to do, even if we didn't think so sometimes.
Sufridor, Tichu, Nori, Los, Vova. Congratulations.
That was a great feeling. In one way, it was really the satisfaction of that the trip is completed. In another hand, it was a little bit sad that it's finished as well. There was no more travel, no more explorers. Come back to normal life.
I think I cried. I was certainly proud of them and proud of the horses. I mean, they did it. They did something no one has ever done. And I don't think you could do it again.
We had a ceremony. Everybody got a piece of the gear to carry off the horses. Louis said they're not going to ride them again. They'll never put anything on these horses again.
Oh, feature. Oh, feature. No more. No more bed. Yeah.
And that was the end of it. Everybody went home eventually. 5.5 years.
I'd always relied on my ability to go jump back on the horse and ride with those guys for a little bit. It was the greatest experience of my life. And for that experience to come to an end was sad for me. I remember getting in the car for the ride back and really kind of feeling a little lost. Like, now what? Because it was over.
I'll go for some lengths of time now, not talking about the trip at all. I think about the horses. Think about Vladimir often. It's a bond that we'll always have. We always call each other on the 3rd of September, the day the trip ended, and on one another's birthdays and on New Year's Eve.
I just continue to live day by day, but with the experiences that I have, my view of things and view of people, it's different from where I was before. All the thoughts and feelings, all the memories with people from all these countries, it make me richer in my soul.
I like to think that because of this ride, I can sit in my easy chair at home and not say, I wish I would have, or, boy, I wish when I was younger I'd done something.
Probably in the grand scheme of things, doesn't mean a hell of a lot after all. But then apart from all the horror of the world, we have to live some kind of life of achievement, perseverance, and of the spirit of adventure.
I think in those 5.5 years, we lived many lifetimes. A lot of times I think we had reason to ask ourselves whether or not what we were trying to accomplish was really worth all the sacrifices. I still couldn't answer that definitively. I'm glad we made the trip, because I don't think I'd be satisfied. I just thought about it and let it lie.
I'm proud of the trip. I'm proud that we made it, and I'm happy that we're still alive.
If I had to talk to a young Louis and a young Vladimir, and they were about to do what Ova and I did, I wouldn't tell them a damn thing. Let them figure it out for themselves.